So tonight, I'm going to talk about the lean way to getting and staying organized. And this is actually the second part of a 4-part series of webinars. So tonight here, part 2 is getting and staying organized. Part 1 was about finding and eliminating waste, which we gave back in December. And then we have 2 more parts scheduled, one for March and one for April. And what you're seeing here, this is basically what's often referred to as lean management. This is, as you can see, it's a way of running a business. And in this case, a small business. It's built on sort of 2 pillars, 2 fundamental ideas or principles. One is that you want to get a little bit better every day. And the other is you want to build a team of engaged employees who really feel part of what's going on and really feel an ownership in what's happening. And so it's some simple ideas, but it's amazing how many businesses actually don't function in this way. And these 4 different parts represent 4 management practices. These are the 4 things that managers need to do in lean organizations to make lean work. And you know, lean management was inspired by Toyota. Toyota, after World War II, you know, grew from a tiny car company into I think they just now are either selling more cars or their market value is more than kind of the, you know, all the other American car companies. And they did this, you know, for various reasons. But one of the big things is they came up with some really unique and powerful ways of managing people and managing operations. And so that's often called lean management. It's become very popular really throughout the world and in the United States, but mostly among large corporations, and especially in the manufacturing area, but also in a lot of service areas. In small business, it's not very well known. And in part 1, I went into more of the detail behind this. I don't want to repeat a whole lot of it, but basically what I've spent the last 10 years or so, spending a lot of time really trying to understand the fundamental, the most essential parts of lean, kind of picking it apart and kind of reassembling it in a way that really works well for small business. And that's what you're seeing here. This is the result of that work. So there's these 4 basic management practices. And what I've learned in doing this and in working with, you know, literally a few hundred different businesses, mostly small, some mid-sized businesses, is that number 1, this really does work. I can tell you it's just amazing what it does when you do it right, and this is the right way to do it is what I'm going to be showing you. But also what I found is there actually is more, in some ways, more potential for lean among small businesses. And the reason is because, as you'll see, you know, the second pillar here, the building a team of engaged employees, is really about how you treat your people. Okay, it's not rocket science. It's but it's something that involves the culture of an organization. Many small business owners get it, some don't. But the bottom line is, in a small business, you know, you can mold that culture a lot more easily than in large businesses. So this is something that really gives you a leg up as far as going up against the big guys. So it's really quite an opportunity for small business. So really what you have is 4 what I call management practices. And these are things that everybody does. Every business does this, right? Everybody has to solve problems. Everybody has to get organized. Everybody has to manage the work, and everybody has to motivate their employees, at least if you do have employees. But what you're learning in these webinars is the lean way of doing it. So for example, last time in part 1, the lean way of solving problems is by recognizing waste, and I went through what waste was, the 4 different wastes of defects, weighting, effort, and materials. So waste is the problem, and then experimenting every day with solutions. So that's part of that, getting a little bit better every day. But they're very practical techniques that we covered last time for doing that. So for tonight, organizing the workplace. What's the lean way of doing that? Well, it's very much about visual or visibility. So it's by making as much as you can visible, doing it in a standardized and sustainable way. So again, we'll go through two very well-tested, very relatively simple, but very powerful techniques for doing this. One is called a 5S organizing technique, and the other is the use of visual controls. Next time in March, we'll go into managing work activities, and then in April, motivating employees. Now, all of these, in part 4, we'll talk about this idea of fully engaging your employees, getting everyone on board and as involved as possible in not only doing work, but also trying to improve work. And the key is really, leading them with trust and respect. And even though in part 4, you'll see some specific techniques for doing that, really all of these parts, including tonight, you'll see involve opportunities for you to engage your people. You don't have to. You can organize the workplace totally on your own as an owner or maybe a manager. But you're going to see that you'll see the way to get everybody involved, and it's just going to be that much more effective. The more you get people involved in organizing, the better chance they're going to sustain that organization. So we'll get into that. The other thing I want to mention about this is, of these 4 management practices, you don't have to bite them all at once. You can go one at a time. This is very flexible. So depending on the needs of your organization, maybe you really feel you need organization right now. Well, then you're at the right place. You can start right here and implement these. You don't have to do all of them. You can kind of transition into this as quickly or as slowly as you need to, as far as your company is concerned. Okay, and again, last time I went into a little more detail on this. I'm going to just summarize what some of the benefits of lean management are. Better financial performance, because you're able to reduce your costs, less capital investment. You tend to have more loyal customers because you develop a very unique understanding of their needs, which I covered in part 1. You will have a less stressful and more fulfilling workplace, which translates into lower personnel turnover, fewer problems. Obviously, right now, that's a huge issue with the great resignation going on. I'm sure many of you are dealing with that. And then lastly, even the greater capacity for change, that once you get your employees engaged and feeling a part of the company, they're more prepared, they're more willing to adapt to change, and sometimes even embrace change. Okay, so tonight, learning objectives. We're going to cover the 2 techniques that involve, organizing your workplace in this lean way. The first one's called a 5S technique. Very well used. It's often one of the first techniques applied when a company tries to get into lean. And it involves organizing both the physical and the virtual workspaces. And I'll talk in a minute here about what I mean by workspaces. But more and more, where we work is not just in the physical world, as you all know. We're getting more and more working in a virtual world, online, in the cloud, and so forth. And these are the 5S steps of the technique that we'll go through. The second, once we're finished with that, we'll get into designing and applying visual controls. Again, these are ways that devices that you put in the workplace that help facilitate the work activities in a very visual way. So before I get into the 5S, though, I want to just step back a second, make sure we're all on the same page as far as what I mean by workplace and workspaces and all this. So the workplace is where the work is done. It kind of houses the people who carry out the work activities, and it consists of various workspaces. So I'll show you in a minute what different spaces are, but it's important to understand that because you have some physical spaces, you have some online or virtual spaces, and some different kinds of spaces that need to be organized in different ways. It houses the people who carry out the work activities. So we'll be talking about that as well. So it's the people as well as information and materials and software and equipment that typically we need to perform work. Some of the spaces, like for example, are dedicated to material goods, like a supply room, and that's strictly physical. But other spaces, like for example, where you carry out the work, like office areas or where information is stored, can be physical or virtual. So here's a few examples. Material storage areas. These are typical areas where physical goods are stored, right? Supply rooms. Kind of a messy looking supply room there, but there's your supply room, shelving. Shipping and receiving area, you can see, you know, goods coming in, maybe going out. Some of these may be FedEx, UPS, I don't know. Warehouses, another type of storage area, and even copier areas, even though it's mainly the copier equipment, but you also have, you know, paper and various other supplies often in this area. The one type of area I'm not showing here is a factory. And the reason I do that is, even though factories are places, of course, where materials are stored, they're kind of specialized in the way you organize them. There are special lean techniques that apply strictly to factories. And I've really developed this whole system for more general applications. And even so, this does apply to factories, but if you do happen to have a factory, there's certainly more specific things that you can do that won't be covered in this webinar. Then you have information storage areas. Now here it can be physical or virtual. So in physical world, where do you store information? Well, usually in a file cabinet, right? Good old fashioned file cabinet. You got file rooms that you often see. I think this is like a medical office where they're all kind of out there. So those are the physical versions, but then in the online digital versions, you've got digital files and folders, which you might find on your desktop. Or you might actually have data repositories where there's whole databases, sets of data online and maybe in the cloud, like on a Google Drive or on SharePoint. So those are some examples of spaces, and we'll get into, you know, how you organize these spaces and how you set up visual controls as well. Then you've got office areas. So this is where you have the people who are communicating, they're collaborating, they're using all this stuff, information materials. Some of these are personal, right? Like you see here, some are shared areas. Again, though, and especially more and more now with, you know, with the pandemic, more and more business is being conducted online. So you have communication is done, of course, emails, Outlook, Zoom. Right now we're on Zoom. And even collaboration. You have Slack. A number of you may be on Slack, Microsoft Teams, and so forth. So the important thing to recognize is these are workspaces just like these are, and these need to be organized just like these are. And we're still catching up with that because this is relatively new. So, you know, I think some of what I'm going to show you tonight is going to be helpful to kind of let you view that in a different, maybe more useful way. There are other kinds of areas, of course, that, you know, you might work in a construction site, you might work in a restaurant, in a shop, or whatever. But these three that I've showed you, I think, kind of give you the, you know, broad idea of what the options are. Okay, so let's look at this 5S organizing technique. And the 5 S's are sort, straighten, scrub, standardize, and sustain. So we'll go through each of these. They're really not that complicated, and but there's, you know, there's right ways and wrong ways to do this. So I'm going to walk you through that. So the 5S technique, it's a structured way of cleaning up and organizing a workspace. And here's an example of a before and after. This was from Alabama State Port Authority. And you can see what this kind of supply room looked like before. See the shelves here. If you wanted to grab something, I guess you had to lean over a table and push a fan out of the way. That wasn't great, but I don't know what this is, some kind of thing in the middle here. But here's after. So the same area, similar equipment, but you can see how much more organized it looks. So this is what 5S does. It gets you from something that looks like that to something that looks like that. Now, in the past, it's been applied primarily to physical workspaces like this, but now we're seeing it being applied to virtual workspaces. And I'll go into some examples of that. But the basic idea is once you have a well-organized workspace, no clutter, no distractions, it just makes it easier, safer, and more productive to carry out the work that goes on in that space. Now, some of the benefits, it's really amazing when you start thinking about it, when you actually look at spaces that are organized. There's a ton of positive things that go on. It's more productive, less stressful to work in an organized space. Quicker and easier to find information and material. Missing or damaged items are clearly visible, okay, rather than being hidden behind, like, oh, gee, that darn thing is, I didn't realize it was broken, I couldn't see it. Avoid unnecessary ordering of hidden items, right? How often did you know, we ordered a whole nother case of copier paper. I didn't realize we had 2 cases hidden behind the shelf, you know, oops, sorry. Easier to keep the space organized, less chance of making a mistake, fewer accidents and injuries, and even less space required. So, and kind of relating it back to the first part of the webinar back in December, all 4 of the wastes are covered here. So as far as reducing waste, just getting organized by itself ends up reducing defects, reduces waiting time, reduces the effort needed to do things, and reduces your usage of materials. Okay, so here's the 5 S's, and it's really useful to break them up into 2 groups. So the first 3, which we'll go through, these first 3 steps, you can kind of think of it like a 3S. It's normally a single event that you apply to a particular workspace area, and I'll show you some examples. The last 2 steps, the standardize and sustain, follow that initial event. And if you do this right, you pretty much do the event once, but this standardize and sustain is a cycle that goes on and on. You're always getting better and better, which is that, you know, get a little bit better all the time idea. So how do you plan for this event where you do the first 3 steps? Okay, so you have to target a workspace, say, okay, this is what we're going to do, but you want to don't bite off too much. You want to be able to complete the first 3 steps in a single one-day event. And I think you'll see why that is, because oftentimes you have to kind of pull things apart to see what you've got. You don't want to stop in the middle of this, because then you'll have things kind of all over the floor or in a messy situation. And it's just better to do it in one day, hopefully even in less than 4 hours, depending on the situation, you know, what kind of space you're trying to organize. Individuals who use that target space should participate in the event to the greatest extent possible, okay? So, you know, realize the idea of organizing is not to make it look pretty, it's to make that space easier to work in. So you need to go and see the people that actually work in the space. And you want them to participate. And why is that? A couple of reasons. One is, you know, they're going to probably have some ideas about how to get things straightened in a better way that works for them. You know, it's for those people that you're trying to organize it. And secondly, and just as important, or maybe more important, is that when they participate in it, they feel a little bit more ownership in it. This is this whole idea of getting your workers engaged, and they're going to be more likely to sustain it. I mean, that's always the problem, right? With organizing, is that over time it kind of gets, you know, disorganized again. So it's really important to try to get as many people involved as you can, as is practical for your company. Before the event, you know, set a scheduled time, invite the participants. So it's an event, and you take some before pictures, or in the event of its digital areas, maybe screenshots of desktops and so forth. So let's go through the 3 S's of that event. The first one is to sort, or sometimes we call it separate. And you're sorting, and it could be you're sorting physical items, you're sorting digital items into similar groups. Now, what are the groups? It depends. Some typical things, if you're sorting a material area, could be like keep versus discard versus give away or repurpose. Information groups might be, okay, these are active files. Okay, these other files I want to archive, but you know, these files I just want to delete. And if you're unsure of whether to discard or delete something, there's this idea of a red tag, and it's really pretty useful, where you put a future discard date and instructions for how to keep the item in case somebody who's not there really did need that item. And I'll show you an example of that. So here's some situations. Some might call it yikes. It's like, hey, these things, obviously, these areas need organization. So the top 2 are physical areas, material goods. So to sort this, you take a look and you say, obviously it's very crammed right now. First of all, what from here could we just simply throw out or get out of here? Okay, because obviously in order to see what you have, you're gonna have to pull this off the shelves, and if you can either throw it straight out, that's great, but at least sort it into, you know, like these yellow boxes seem to have some commonality, and, you know, maybe put those in a box somewhere, but just kind of get it sorted out so you know what you have. Like here with the shipping and receiving, okay, these look pretty fresh, but would it be worth sorting into maybe these are UPS, maybe these are FedEx, I don't know, just some basic idea of what you have. Here's an example of a desktop, obviously, information. And here again, it looks like, gee, we got a lot, you know, what do you really have here? What are the commonalities? Can we delete any of this? The key here is probably creating some, you know, master folders, just kind of getting things organized. It's not, this first part of it, this event is not, doesn't have to be a huge, long effort. And then here in an office, you know, just kind of getting this straightened up. So, so that's sorting, kind of seeing what you've got, sometimes involving laying it out, you know, on the floor or getting it off the shelves. The next step is to straighten. And this is basically kind of like you see here, you know, putting the items, they're still there if you didn't get rid of them, into some sort of order. You can see that, you know, it's nice order. It's not like it's perfect, but getting it back to some kind of order. Here's the key. Don't spend a whole lot of time debating about it. Oh, let's see, what if we had a rack there? What could be better? You know, just do it. And this is a very important philosophy of lean is you don't want to spend a lot of time analyzing a situation. You just want to try things. And we covered it last time in the first part, that this is about this getting a little better all the time, experimenting, trying things out. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, but just do it, get it done. So at this point, you basically want to get things back in order. You really want to have only minor upgrades to existing equipment, racks, or furniture. I do kind of think this might be worth getting at least some cheap shelving to start, to kind of get these off the floor. But anyway, you don't want to make any major changes at this point. Now, there are some rules for straightening that I think are useful to understand as you put things back. And this is, by the way, one of the 3 handouts or PDFs that should have been sent to you. I think it was sent out to all the attendees, kind of showing, you know, these are the things, this is how you do it. This is how you straighten things in this first 3S event. There's 3 parts to it. You want to have an assigned location, which is the idea every kind of item should have a place. So if you're looking for, you know, cleaning supplies, it should be in one particular area, maybe on a shelving section, a marked location. Different types of files in the digital world. Okay, different files or apps should be stored maybe in certain master folders or in certain zones on your desktop. Just so you know, generally where they're supposed to be is the idea. Then you have visibility. So you want to be able to easily see them. You know, again, simple but important. Labels should be clear, readable, facing forward. Avoid overloaded shelves. You saw that clearly in that last picture. In the digital world, use clear, consistent, and descriptive file names with easily readable fonts. You know, how many times, like the solution to that screen full of icons wasn't, you know, let's set it now so we can put double the amount of icons on there, because you can't read that stuff. So again, you know, it's common sense, but gosh, this stuff is important. Accessibility, easily access the stored items in the physical world. The more frequently used items should not require a lot of walking. They should be accessible within arm's reach. Don't store material behind other material if you can avoid it. In the digital world, the most frequently used files and apps should be reachable with a minimal number of clicks. And in the digital world, walking is kind of like clicking. You know, how many times do you have to click to find something? And avoid excessive number of subfolder levels. When you get, you know, you start layering them in, if you have to dig down 3, 4, 5 ways into the subfolders, you really lose visibility. And remember, a lot of this is about visibility. The third S is then scrub or shine. And now that you got it all back in place, actually removing the dirt and debris, and it's physically cleaning. It's important. It maximizes your visibility, and it's psychologically important. And this applies to the online spaces as well. Like if you just cleaned up an online space, maybe you came up with a way of naming your folders to be correct. So go ahead and correct them. Delete the files you were going to delete. Get it in position. And after this 3S event, so now you've completed the event, take an after picture or a screenshot and post it in the space. Okay, so that's how you do the event. Get through the first 3 S's of the 5 S's. Here's some examples. These are real examples from a course I taught not long ago. Here's a cabinet with some medical supplies before, and then here's after. And you see, we're not trying to make huge improvements, but now we have some labeling. We got them straightened up some. Here was that desktop. Again, obviously did something with them. I'm not sure where the files went, but it's certainly a lot cleaner looking. Here's the office before, and here's after. And notice, and I'll be talking about this as soon as I get into visual controls here in just a little bit. Wall space is like gold. Okay, you see before there was something posted here, and they did post, I think, the after picture to kind of say this is what we'd like to keep this area to look like. But wall space is just so valuable. Why? Because you sit here in this chair for a lot of the day, and it doesn't take much for your eyes to go right above these screens. And so this is great space for reminders. You'll see for the visual controls. You don't want to clutter it, but it's wall space is just, I can tell right away if the company understands visual control or not. I can walk in the door and look at the walls of the office and know right away if they understand that or not. Okay, so now moving on to step 4, which is standardize. So in this step, you're trying to create a standard organization, and that may be what you produced in step 3, because you took the picture and you said, okay, this is our standard for now, but it's supposed to be a continuous improvement cycle. So we want to continuously improve that standard. We want to get it better and better. And what are the things we can do? Here's where we can do a little more involved things. So for example, in a physical space, maybe making changes to the furniture, equipment, racks, layout. I'll give you a couple examples of those. In a virtual space, this might involve scanning paper records. I mean, a lot of companies are going through that now to get some of those older paper records out of physical files and into online records. But even in some of those like Slack and Microsoft Teams, there's various ways of organizing user roles, authorizations, channels, groups, and rooms. So all those are kind of the virtual equivalent of how you organize, physically your layout of your office area, who can talk to who in what channel, and so forth. And I've been involved in situations where you periodically have to, reorganize those things. So that's what goes on in step 4 here. And here's a couple of examples, as I say, of where you can, during this step, as you're ongoing, one of the common lean solutions to layout is what's called a work cell. That's where you lay out, like for example here, these 5 individuals that all do work that are related. Instead of stretching them out in a long line, you create kind of this U-shaped cell. And what that does, we actually did this in our wholesale business. We had inside sales reps organized exactly like this. And this way, if this rep is talking to a customer and has a question about a particular drawer slide, then this person here has the answer. They just swing their chair on. Hey, Mary, do you have the answer to this? Or so you can communicate. Walking is reduced. There's just a lot of benefits to it. And here's a couple of real life examples of laying out a work cell. This was a study done by McKinsey, where this was a sandwich shop, kind of a sandwich counter, and where they reorganized the layout. This was before, and what you're seeing here is kind of a little, they call it a spaghetti chart. It's kind of the where you have to walk to make a sandwich. And there's actually 13 different positions with the old layout. Down here, they reorganized the layout, kind of made this cockpit station, and now there's only 5 steps, 5 positions. What did that do? It reduced the time to prepare a breakfast sandwich by 51 seconds, a lunch by a minute. And you might say, that's not much, but you know what? A lunch counter that's doing 300-400 sandwiches a day, that's 5-6 hours of time of person time that you could be using elsewhere. So anyway, work cells, very useful idea. Work kits, another thing, way of organizing materials, maybe on rollers, maybe office supplies and so forth. So the 5th step then is to sustain. And again, this is an ongoing thing, but it's not just, a philosophy. There should be explicit ways of doing it, keeping things in order. You might periodically have a 5S review, like, okay, guys, we're gonna walk around and kind of look at everybody's desk, or we're gonna review what's going on. This idea was, I found really useful. It's out on there's a few different people that have suggested this, but it's the idea of a daily 5-minute organizing timer. And the idea is you have it could be a little egg timer, however you want to do it on your iPhone. But every day, just say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to organize. And you're obviously not going to do a whole 5S, but this is where you sustain, this kind of get things back in place, which normally happens. Things get a little out of place. And if you do that every day, you're really going to, it'll really add up. So, those are the kinds of things you do in the sustain step. So if normally you can stay between steps 4 and 5, standardizing and sustaining, getting better and better. Sometimes you have to repeat step 3, clean things up, scrub. If you have to, if things get really disorganized, you might have to go back to step 1 where you're sorting and then straightening. But if you're doing this right, you shouldn't have to return to steps 1 or 2. You should be able to live kind of in the world of step 3, 4, and 5. So that is 5S. That's the lean way of organizing a workspace, whether it's physical or virtual online. Now we're going to cover the other technique for organizing, which is called visual controls. And you see there's 5 different kinds I've outlined here. But basically, visual controls, these are, I call them kind of devices that are placed in the workplace in various spaces that facilitate the work by making it transparent. And what do I mean by transparent? I mean that everybody can see what's going on. They can see what's happening right now. They can see what maybe is going to be happening soon, kind of how, what are the normal steps of activity. Especially important, they can see if something has gone wrong. You can immediately tell what's happening. And you'll see plenty of examples of these. They can be physical devices, again, like charts, displays, floor markings, etc. Or they can be virtual online digital devices like toolbars, email flags, file naming conventions, and so forth. So the idea of visual controls, again, like the 5S organizing is there to help the people that use those spaces. Here, you want to support the people actually doing the work. And so when things are a lot more transparent and visual, it just helps you do the work better. You avoid more mistakes. And you can actually improve. You can see opportunities for getting better and better. And so if you can't see the problem, you really can't fix it. And that's one of the ideas of making things as visible and transparent as you can. So here's a visual controls chart, just shows examples, but these are the 5 really types of controls. This is another one of your handouts that you got the PDF for. So I'll go through these briefly, and I have some examples here from actual experiences in some of my former clients and classes that I'll go through to show you what was done in certain situations. So the first type is called a find it. And these are devices that help you find things, locate them, retrieve them, store them again, whether they're physical or digital. So here's your physical examples. Here was the the storeroom we saw earlier. So color-coded bins can help you find things. Labels can help you find things. Labels over here on the filing cabinets. Here's another example. This is called a shadow box, where you, on a vertical surface, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's little shadow areas for each of these tools, so that you know where it goes, you know where to find it. If you're looking for the broom, the boy is right there, it's right in front of you. In the online examples, you have folders and naming conventions. So that, you know, if you're going to try to find a file, you need to know which file it's in. And so the way you name files becomes important. Or you have these good old hashtags that are ways of finding conversations, finding a lot of social media sources. It could be hashtags, keywords, and so forth. The next type is how-tos. So these are show you how to do things, but very visual. See how to perform tasks or make physical movements. So for example, here's a little, how do you clean up this kitchen? And I'm going to show you a really neat video in just a minute of examples comes from the video. Or, you know, where do you go? In, out, you know, how do we make physical movements? Online could be just, you know, Googling how do you do things. It seems like you can Google just about anything these days and get a good concise answer of how do you, for example, in this case, how do you use the inbox rules in Outlook.com? Or even just good old menu items, the help, okay? And you might say, oh, that's pretty obvious, but gosh, it's amazing how few of the features of these softwares we really understand. And it's right there in front of you, but you have to take the time to go look for it and learn about these things. Action cues. So now this is where you're reminded of or triggered for the need to take action. So here's, for example, actually when I got my first vaccination. This was a very well organized, very visual layout here in the hospital. And there were different locations, you can't see them, different desks you could go to. But as soon as one of the nurses was available, she would just hold up a sign. And we were all standing there. Nobody had to tell me where to go or anything. I just, oh, sign went up, okay. It's like triggered me to take action, to walk there. Sometimes you have this set up kind of a reorder trigger. These, I think, maybe are toners for the copier. And so when this gets down to a certain level, you might have a marking here that says, okay, when there's only 3 left, time to order, triggering that. Online, I mean, tons of apps now kind of walk you through and trigger what you need to do. Like, for example, in a PDF form where you fill in the PDF, you know, how it's, you know, pointing you to the next one, and so forth. But that's got to be designed, you know, that's got to be set up. Or calendar reminders, setting those up, very visual. It triggers you, and you'll see examples of this. These are really useful. The last two have to do with real-time displays, which is current status of where things are at, whether it's a process or people or assets, or the prior performance of maybe those process, people, or groups. So a real-time display, for example, would be, you know, where do we stand, what patients are in what rooms. There's all sorts of, you know, physical area displays, and you can, you know, imagine how those can also be online, pretty easily to moved online. Performance trackers, again, more prior performance. Here's actually at City Furniture, their performance wall. They have tons and tons of information on the wall. Here's some digital feedbacks on where things stand in the past. How are we doing so far on target, or doing it online? Okay, so that sort of walks you through it. Again, this is just to give you examples, but it's important to have these usages set up, because this is how you train people on how to use them. The managers really have to primarily, at least at first, be involved in designing and setting these things up, but then you have to train the people who do the work to understand what they are and say, hey, if you have to find something, here's what you do. If you have to learn how to do something, you need an action cue, and so forth. Now, I'm going to show you this video. This is Paul Akers. He and I kind of grew up in business together. I covered this last time in part 1. He was one of my suppliers. We were in the cabinet and furniture hardware distribution business. And this is about a 2-minute video. I'm going to show you, he's going to walk you through how he uses visual controls in his kitchen, in his plant, in his factory. And he's just a fanatic with it. He's just a great guy, and he really has done a great job of simplifying a lot of this. He wrote a great book called 2-Second Lean as well, that I would encourage you to get if you want to follow up further. Let me walk you through this. You'll see what he's saying, and I'll stop at a couple of points and point out which visual control we're looking at. So here we go.
This is Epic Lean Kitchen. I'm going to show you the coolest kitchen in the world, and of course it's at Basscap, and I'm going to show you all the neat things that we do to make it so easy to work in our kitchen and to eat at our lunch area. So watch this. Check out the lunch table. The salt and pepper shakers, they have a specific place, so they can't be strewn about. They have to go back exactly where they need to go, and as a result we have a highly organized lunch area. Even the paper towels have a spot, and of course Windex, because I'm Greek, has a spot. So when it comes time to clean up, you simply take a paper towel, you spray your area, and you clean up, and you're done. That way our table always stays perfect.
Okay, so there's an example of find it. You know, if you're looking for paper towels, you know where it is. If you want to know where the cleaner is, you know where it is. So there's a perfect example of a find it visual control.
In our refrigerator area and our kitchen area, we have a cleaning chart here that shows exactly the steps for doing everything in the kitchen every day. So our kitchen stays perfect all day long. We even have a list of all the people who are responsible for kitchen duty on that particular.
So that's the how-to, right? You saw that before, how-to, but you know, it's not a bunch of words, it's pictures, it's very visual, but that's a how-to visual control.
My favorite is the dishwasher. Check this out. The dishwasher has a lot of great features because we made washing dishes very easy, because a lot of times one of the most confusing things is whether or not the dishes are clean or dirty. So we have this little Velcro dot. It happens to be one of our products. And if it's red on the outside, that means the dishes inside are dirty. If it's green, that means the dishes are either in the wash cycle or they're clean, so don't load it. But the next thing is when and how to start the dishwasher. To start the dishwasher, you just push button 1 and button 2. There is no guesswork on all these other buttons. You just push those 2 in that order, turn the dot over to green because you started the cycle, and you're done.
So there you see the red-green button is kind of the current status of the, you know, of the dishwasher. Is it ready to go? You know, green means, you know, it's ready to be loaded. Red, it's, you know, don't load it. It's already in there. And of course, you also saw some how-to. The rest of it, I'll let it run, but you'll see the idea of some labels and the idea of being reachable and so forth that I talked about earlier in organizing.
Favorite improvement to the dishwasher is right here. One of our employees came up with a great idea of zip tying a spoon, a fork, and a knife onto the basket. Why? So that when you load the dishes, you get the spoons in the right place, you get the forks in the right place, and of course you get the knives in the right place. And that's a big deal because when you pull the clean dishes out, you don't have to sort them. So that saves time of motion and transportation because you get the right forks, knives the first time out without a whole bunch of sorting. It seems simple, but it actually makes a big deal, and it actually makes unloading a dishwasher fun. In our kitchen area, you can see that everything is clearly marked out. Even the microwaves, the bowls, the plates, the straws, everything is detailed out. Even our boxes up here, you can easily access them if you're not tall just by pulling on this little hole right here, and it tells you there's sugar and soda tins in there. Very strong visual controls. That's how you create an epic lean cook. That's how you create an epic, stop laughing at me, Kathy. Kathy's laughing at me over there. That's how you create an epic lean kitchen. Kathy?
So he's some guy, but boy, he really knows how to show this, and he's very, very popular too. So you have an idea of what visual controls are. Here's the design steps, and this is another one of the handouts. So this is to help you as the manager or the owner to what you need to do to get these set up. You always remember your visual controls want to be simple as possible, legible, easy to interpret, easy to use, and accessible to all if possible. pretty much 5 steps. First, identify an opportunity to create a visual control. Now, it might be in response to a problem like waste. And I'll show you examples of this in just a second, or a few different companies where we did. Or you might just see an example like, oh, gee, I didn't know I could do that. Or maybe what you just saw in the video there. Wow, maybe I could do that. So you get an idea for it. But the important thing is you look for the work activity that is involved in it and the workers who would actually use the visual work. So this is important to realize that 5S technique that we covered before is applied to a workspace, kind of either a physical or a virtual area where work is done. But here, we're looking at a particular work activity, or sometimes we call it a process. And I'll give you some examples, but it's the same basic idea. You want to know the people who are doing that work because they're the ones that are going to use these visual controls. And again, you're not out to make them look pretty, you're making them to be useful and improve the work. So once you know who the workers are that will use those controls, determine the content, the format, location of the control that will facilitate that work, and especially uncover any problems that pop up. And, you know, if possible, do an actual mock-up if it's kind of a physical thing, or do a drawing and review it with those visual control users. Again, getting them more involved, modify if needed. They may have some good ideas for how it can work better for them. And then you implement it and inform, train the users and get it going. Now, a couple of things about this. The last 2 of the 5 types, which are the current status, display, and then the performance trackers, they have numbers in them that need to change. And so somebody has to be in charge of updating those numbers. And yes, you can automate that, but, and I talked about this in my last time in the webinar, there's really some real benefits to handwriting, whether it's on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard. I know it sounds like, oh, that really? But at least at first, at least when you start doing this, you want to do that. There's a lot of good benefits to that. And eventually maybe you can automate it. So don't be afraid to have these things, you know, handwritten. They don't have to be perfect looking. The other thing I want to mention is, you know, don't overdo it. Don't create kind of visual pollution. You know, everything you put up on that wall or in the floor or wherever you're putting these visual controls, the more you put, it's going to be distracting too. So you want to have things that really work or really necessary, but don't overdo it. Okay, so almost to the finish here. I'm going to go through 3 different companies that we did this work on and came up with visual controls, just to give you an idea of how this works in real situations. And the first one was a law firm. Wasn't a huge law firm. They had about, I think, 5 or 6 attorneys, maybe 15 people total. And again, remember, we're looking at a work activity or process. In this case, we looked at the activity it took to schedule and close out a case. So this involved, lawsuits, cases, a lot of documents, people signing off, calculating money, fees, and then just kind of getting things closed out. So, and this firm, even though it wasn't that big of a firm, they had a few hundred ongoing cases. So it was, you know, this is a pretty substantial process. So here's the 5 different types and what they actually did. So one of the problems was, you know, closing a case could go on for 2, 3, 4, 5 months. So a lot of these overlapped. When you have to go back in and find a case file, it was often hard to find it. They spent a lot of time looking around, like, where's the Jones case, you know? And so they eventually came up with the visual control was a good naming convention for the case files. It was very visual. They could see it. The files were all sorted by those names and they could find them very easily. In terms of how-tos, checklist of required documents and deadlines. You know, as you can imagine, in law cases, especially with the judges involved, there were certain documents had to be done by certain deadlines, and making a checklist, posting it so everybody knew what steps had to happen by when. Very visual, kind of a how-to. Also, email and document templates. You know, if they had to do the same kind of document or email over and over, clearly, you know, make a template so you can see how it is, not have to, you know, reinvent the wheel. For the action cues, many professional services have this problem. I'm sure anybody in this call would say, yep. When you're dealing with clients and you need information from them, you send them an email, you call them and say, we need this. And then, when are they going to get back to you? Because you can't really control that. So having calendar reminders built in, any kind of third party, whether it's a client or maybe another law firm or whatever, have those pop up visually so that either you can then send the email when it reminds you, or even an automatic email can go out. In terms of the real-time status, the status of cases in progress. So you can see, well, where do things stand? Like I say, they had a few hundred ongoing. And here's where they actually used an ABC system, which is kind of an 80-20 rule. You take the 20% of cases that are really responsible for 80% of, say, the fees or revenue, and break those out and make sure those are proceeding, quickly, but able to make sure nothing's falling through the cracks, things falling behind. And then lastly, in performance trackers, average cycle time. How long is it taken to complete cases, say by week? And this is more reflecting back, but it's important for everybody to see this, because if you want all the people doing the work to participate in making things better, you need to feed them information. They need to know this kind of stuff. And so this is the way that they fed that, so everybody could kind of be alert to, wow, why are the cases starting to take longer now? What can we do to improve that? So that was a law firm. Then we had an eBay seller. It's a company that would actually buy sunglasses in bulk, list them. So the activity was listing, selling, and shipping an item. So they'd list a batch of them on eBay. They'd, whenever they got a sale of an individual or a group of the sunglasses, they would then fulfill it, ship the item. And these are some of the issues that came up, the problems. And of course, they did have a supply, a storage area where they kept sunglasses. So labels were an issue, and they came up with a better labeling system, color coded. But on the eBay side, you have to think about, so that's find its, but the find its also related to potential customers who had to find, hey, that you have this. So that involved thinking about how are the hashtags and search keywords set up on eBay so that people could find your product. In terms of how-tos, eBay provided a lot of very useful merchant reports, but it was always kind of a pain to remember the steps and how do I generate the report again? And they weren't using it as much as they really could. So just creating a simple checklist of steps. Here's how you generate that report. It's amazing how useful some of these can be. In terms of the action queues, they ship mostly through UPS and some FedEx. And whenever there was a shipping problem, there was a way for UPS to post an alert, but they wanted to make sure it was right on the screen so they could react. Action queue, we need to take action. In terms of the status display, looking at all the items, what is their status and how much they've aged. So the key thing there is watching for items that have been sitting there. So we want to turn those. We don't want them sitting there because they're using up our, valuable capital. And then the last was the back orders by time period and product group. So, what is the potential? Gee, if we only had more of these items, we could have sold more. So all of these help, again, to improve visibility and get everybody more involved in the operation. The last one I'll show you is a managed service provider. These are companies that basically act as the IT department for small, sometimes mid-sized businesses. So one of the functions they perform for their clients is offboarding a user. So what that means is when a user who would be an employee of the client gets another job or maybe retires or whatever, they have to be offboarded. They have to be taken off all the systems that they're on. And often they're on 4, 5, 6 different systems. And so there's a whole process involved here. It's an activity. So in terms of find its, one of the problems they found was because, every time a user would set up their new user name and number, maybe it might be different. It might say David in one place and Dave in another and David H in one. And so when it comes time to start pulling them out of the systems, it was hard to find them all. So they came up with a common naming convention, for how usernames should be presented. Again, they would deal with clients who on the front end would have to provide information, and it was very often they didn't provide it all. They weren't sure what they had to provide. So having a good questionnaire, very clear, that could be sent to the clients in the front end, get that information from them. Here, same kind of problem. We need information from the clients. We've been sitting on this, so having those calendar reminders, hey, after, a week or 2 weeks or whatever, please, we need this. Don't forget about it. Status, the offboarding tickets. So the tickets are the requests that come in from the clients. In progress, let's see how long they've been sitting there, similar to the cases in progress with the lawyer. And then average cycle time to offboard a user. Okay, so I just try to give you some ideas of how this works in practice, how you can get started. Here's what I suggest. Pick a workspace. Don't bite off too much. Take small materials storage area is a good start. It might even be just a shelving area or something. Don't bite off too much, but actually schedule a block of time. Invite a few people at least, or maybe you do it yourself. But choose that workspace. Go ahead and conduct the event. Those first 3 S's, right? Clean up and organize the space. That's the sort, straighten, and scrub. And there you refer to that rules for straightening. So that'll help you in kind of putting that together. And observe and celebrate the beneficial effects. Step back for a second and just see how much nicer it is to work there, how much easier it is. Hey, you found some things you didn't know, whatever. That's for 5S. And then for the visual control, try doing a visual control. Look at that visual controls chart. Just come up with one, and then follow those visual control design steps. That was another handout. And implement it if possible, and observe the result. So these are really relatively simple things, but they're really powerful. And what I would really encourage you to do is follow the lean idea of just go do it. At least print out those 3 documents, the 3 PDFs, the rules for straightening, the visual controls chart, visual control design. Print them out, put them on your wall, and they're how-tos. Actually, they're how-to visual controls, but they can also be action cues to remind you, hey, I really need to do this. But hopefully you'll have some time. Again, don't bite off a lot. Go do it. It's really worth it.
And David, do you have any final words?
Just encourage you. I didn't have the time to really go into it, but I really used this system in my business, my wholesale business, and grew it over 10 years from basically a company that was out of business. We bought the assets to a $10 million, 60-person business that was top profitability, sold it to a large German firm, and actually, allows me to be here doing this and be able to go back to school and, teach in the MBA program and so forth. So I know this works. I absolutely know it works. I won't tell you it's easy in some respects. The main thing is you really have to understand this idea of building trust and respect, which I'll cover more in the later webinar, but it's just so powerful. And I've always said, if you do this in the right way, you will be unbeatable. I'll beat you every time with this approach, and I don't care what the business is. So,
all right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for attending, and we will stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Good night, everybody.
good night.